The most confusing and heartbreaking aspect of dating an avoidant is how they can go from showing genuine interest, pursuing you actively, and appearing completely invested in building something meaningful together to vanishing, without explanation, as if you never existed at all. This isn't about them losing interest or finding someone else. It's about their nervous system treating your growing importance as an existential threat that requires immediate escape for their psychological survival. Their initial high interest was real, their attraction was genuine, and their excitement about connecting with you was authentic. But the very success of that early connection triggers a psychological alarm system that interprets your increasing significance as danger rather than blessing. The better things go between you, the more terrified they become of how much they have to lose. The more they care about you, the more unbearable the thought of you eventually leaving becomes. Understanding their ghosting pattern isn't about excusing their cruel behavior or waiting for them to overcome their fears and return. It's about recognizing that their disappearance says everything about their psychological limitations and nothing about your worth, desirability, or the quality of connection you shared. Their inability to handle the natural progression of intimacy isn't a reflection of your inadequacy. It's evidence of their profound emotional dysfunction. The tragedy is that they ghost precisely when relationships have the potential to become meaningful, transformative, and healing for both people involved. They run from the very thing their heart most desperately wants because their trauma has convinced them that love equals inevitable devastation. They destroy exactly what could save them from their loneliness because their wounded psyche can't distinguish between past dangers and present opportunities for genuine connection. Their ghosting follows predictable patterns that reveal the depth of their attachment trauma while simultaneously showing the complete disregard for others' emotional well-being that characterizes their self-protective strategies. They're not disappearing because you did something wrong. They're disappearing because you did everything right, and that level of rightness feels too dangerous for someone whose survival has depended on keeping love at a safe distance. The honeymoon phase trap, when their guard was down. The early stages of connection with an avoidant feel intoxicating and promising because you're experiencing them during the only period when their psychological defenses are naturally lowered. During initial dating, before attachment forms and real intimacy develops, they can access their capacity for warmth, enthusiasm, and genuine connection without triggering the deep-seated fears that will eventually destroy what you're building together. This honeymoon phase isn't manipulation or false advertising. It's a glimpse of who they could be if they weren't imprisoned by their attachment trauma. Their initial high interest emerges because new connections feel psychologically safe to their nervous system. Without established emotional investment, there's nothing meaningful to lose, no vulnerability to protect, and no attachment bonds that could result in devastating abandonment. They can flirt, pursue, and connect freely because the stakes feel low and the outcome seems manageable regardless of how things develop between you. Watch how naturally affectionate, communicative, and available they are during this early period. They text back quickly, make plans enthusiastically, show genuine curiosity about your life, and seem genuinely excited about getting to know you better. This isn't performed interest designed to hook you. It's their authentic self emerging when they feel safe from the emotional dangers that typically keep them guarded and distant. The honeymoon phase feels particularly intense because they're operating from a place of genuine excitement about connection without the contamination of attachment fears that will eventually poison their ability to maintain intimacy. They can enjoy your company, appreciate your qualities, and look forward to spending time together because their nervous system hasn't yet identified you as someone who could hurt them through abandonment or rejection. Their pursuit behavior during this period often surprises people who know them well because it represents such a departure from their typical emotional unavailability. Friends and family might comment on how different they seem, how happy they appear, or how invested they're acting in developing this new relationship. They're accessing parts of their personality that have been buried under layers of self-protection for years. The trap aspect emerges because this honeymoon phase creates expectations and hope that can't be sustained once their attachment system activates. Both you and they begin to believe that this level of connection, enthusiasm, and emotional availability represents their true capacity for relationship, not understanding that it's actually the exception rather than the rule for how they handle intimate connection. Their genuine enjoyment of your company during this period makes their later withdrawal feel particularly cruel and confusing because you know they're capable of the warmth and presence they later withhold. You've seen evidence of their capacity for connection, which makes their subsequent emotional unavailability feel like a choice rather than a limitation, like rejection rather than self-protection. The honeymoon phase often includes future planning, romantic gestures, and statements about their feelings that feel sincere because they are sincere in the moment. They genuinely mean what they're saying when they talk about wanting to build something with you, when they express excitement about shared plans, when they indicate that you're special and different from others they've dated. Their trauma hasn't yet convinced them that these good feelings are dangerous. Their nervous system during this period operates in approach mode rather than avoidance mode, making them naturally inclined toward connection, vulnerability, and emotional risk-taking. They're not yet scanning for exit strategies, preparing for disappointment, or building walls against intimacy because their attachment fears haven't been triggered by the reality of growing feelings and increasing emotional investment. The most heartbreaking aspect of this honeymoon phase is how it represents their authentic capacity for love when they feel safe from attachment trauma. This period shows you exactly what kind of partner they could be if they weren't controlled by fears about vulnerability, abandonment, and emotional dependence. It's a preview of the relationship that could exist if they could maintain this emotional openness consistently. The trap completes itself when this natural, beautiful early connection begins triggering their deeper psychological wounds around attachment and intimacy. The very success of the honeymoon phase creates the conditions that will activate their avoidance patterns, transforming the person who pursued you enthusiastically into someone who runs from the connection they helped create. Their genuine early interest becomes the foundation for their later terror, making their eventual ghosting feel like a betrayal of everything you built together during those promising initial weeks or months. The overwhelm point, when you become too real to them. The psychological shift from excitement to terror occurs when you transition from being a fantasy or possibility to becoming a real person with genuine emotional significance in their life. This transformation happens gradually and then suddenly, like a switch flipping in their nervous system that reframes your presence from opportunity to threat. The moment they realize they actually care about you, that your opinion matters to them, that losing you would hurt, that's when their trauma kicks in and begins the process of destroying what they've helped create. Their overwhelm begins when they notice their own emotional investment escalating beyond their comfort zone. Maybe they catch themselves looking forward to your messages, feeling disappointed when plans get cancelled, or thinking about you during mundane daily activities. These natural relationship developments feel dangerous to someone whose survival strategy has always involved maintaining emotional distance and independence. Your importance to them starts feeling like emotional dependency, which triggers every alarm bell in their psychologically self-protective system. The too real point often coincides with relationship milestones that suggest permanence or deeper commitment, meeting friends or family, staying over multiple nights, having serious conversations about feelings or the future, or simply reaching a level of comfort and familiarity that implies ongoing connection. These natural relationship progressions feel like traps closing around them rather than beautiful developments worth celebrating and nurturing. Watch how their demeanor changes when they realize how much they've revealed about themselves, how vulnerable they've become, or how much access you now have to their emotional world. The same openness that felt natural and exciting during early dating now feels exposing and dangerous. They begin to panic about how much you know about their fears, their wounds, their limitations, and their authentic self beneath the carefully constructed persona they typically present to the world. Their overwhelm intensifies when they realize that your feelings for them have also deepened, creating mutual emotional investment that feels suffocating rather than bonding. Your care for them stops feeling like validation and starts feeling like obligation. Obligation to reciprocate your feelings, to meet your emotional needs, to maintain the connection at a level that requires ongoing vulnerability and emotional availability they're not sure they can sustain. The reality of your separate life, needs, and emotional world begins to feel overwhelming rather than interesting. During early dating, learning about your work stress, family dynamics, and personal challenges felt like getting to know you. Now, these same realities feel like emotional labor they're expected to help manage, support systems they're supposed to participate in, and complexity they're responsible for navigating successfully without causing harm or disappointment. Their overwhelm includes the recognition that they've created expectations through their early enthusiasm and availability that they now feel incapable of meeting consistently. The warm, communicative, emotionally present person they were during the honeymoon phase now feels like a performance they can't maintain rather than their authentic self. They begin to panic about disappointing you when their natural avoidance patterns resurface and you discover their emotional limitations. The too real transformation often includes them starting to notice your flaws, limitations, and humanity in ways that feel threatening rather than endearing. During early connection, your quirks felt charming and your vulnerabilities felt like opportunities for closeness. Now, these same qualities feel like evidence that you're not the perfect, undemanding partner their fantasy required you to feel safe with attachment. They become overwhelmed by the realization that loving you means accepting the possibility of losing you, either through your choice to leave or through circumstances beyond their control. This awareness of potential loss makes the current connection feel precarious and anxiety-provoking rather than secure and enjoyable. They start imagining all the ways the relationship could end badly and begin to feel like they're sitting on an emotional time bomb. Their overwhelm extends to recognizing that maintaining the relationship requires ongoing emotional investment, communication skills, and vulnerability tolerance they're not confident they possess. The relationship stops feeling like something that's flowing naturally and starts feeling like work they're not qualified to perform successfully. They begin to doubt their capacity to be a good partner rather than enjoying the process of learning and growing together. The practical aspects of deeper relationship integration begin to feel overwhelming, as they realize that caring about you means considering your needs in their decision-making, coordinating schedules and priorities, and potentially adjusting their lifestyle to accommodate shared goals and experiences. The independence they've always treasured starts feeling threatened by the natural interdependence that develops in healthy relationships. Their emotional overwhelm often manifests as physical symptoms: anxiety, insomnia, digestive issues, or general restlessness that they associate with the relationship rather than recognizing as trauma responses to increasing intimacy. These physical reactions reinforce their psychological belief that the relationship is becoming dangerous to their well-being rather than understanding that their nervous system is responding to unfamiliar but potentially healing emotional territory. The most tragic aspect of this overwhelm point is that they're panicking about exactly what makes relationships meaningful and transformative. The real intimacy, genuine care, and authentic connection that could actually heal their attachment wounds if they could tolerate the vulnerability required to receive it. They're running from the very medicine their lonely heart most desperately needs because their trauma has convinced them that love is poison rather than nourishment. The panic response: how their nervous system hijacks the connection. When the avoidant reaches their overwhelm threshold, their nervous system doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It activates a full-scale emergency response that treats your loving presence like a mortal threat, requiring immediate escape for psychological survival. Their fight-or-flight system, designed to protect them from physical danger, can't distinguish between the vulnerability of love and the vulnerability of being attacked by a predator. To their trauma-wired brain, opening their heart feels identical to exposing their throat to someone who could destroy them. The panic response begins with their nervous system flooding their body with stress hormones that create physical sensations of danger, even when you're being perfectly loving and safe. Their heart races when you text about spending more time together. They feel nauseous when you express deeper feelings. They experience chest tightness when you mention future plans. These aren't metaphorical responses. They're literal physiological reactions to emotional intimacy that their body interprets as life-threatening situations. Their cognitive processing becomes hijacked by panic, transforming normal relationship conversations into perceived threats requiring defensive action. When you say, "I love you," their brain hears, "I need you to be emotionally available," in ways that will eventually destroy you. When you suggest meeting their family, their nervous system translates this as, "I'm about to trap you in obligations you can't escape." When you talk about your feelings being hurt, their panic interprets this as, "I'm going to use emotional manipulation to control your behavior." The panic creates what trauma therapists call emotional flooding, where their capacity for rational thought gets overwhelmed by survival-based reactions. They can't access the part of their brain that knows you're safe, that recognizes your genuine care, or that remembers the positive experiences you've shared together. Instead, they're operating from a primitive brain state that only knows how to fight, flee, or freeze when faced with perceived emotional annihilation. Their panic response often includes catastrophic thinking patterns, where they imagine the worst possible outcomes of continued relationship involvement. They picture themselves becoming emotionally dependent and then being abandoned. They envision you discovering their flaws and rejecting them cruelly. They imagine being trapped in emotional intimacy that slowly suffocates their sense of self. These aren't rational fears. They're trauma-based predictions that feel absolutely real to their activated nervous system. The physiological panic makes them interpret your normal relationship needs as excessive demands that prove the relationship is already becoming the emotional prison their trauma warned them about. Your desire for consistency feels like suffocating control. Your emotional needs feel like overwhelming burdens. Your love feels like a trap designed to make them vulnerable to devastation they won't survive. Their nervous system can't tell the difference between healthy interdependence and dangerous dependency. Their panic often manifests as sudden personality changes that shock both you and them with their intensity. The warm, available person you've been getting to know disappears, replaced by someone cold, distant, and seemingly indifferent to your feelings. This isn't a conscious choice to hurt you. It's their nervous system's automatic protective mechanism, creating distance from what it perceives as mortal danger to their emotional survival. The panic response includes their brain desperately searching for evidence that the relationship is problematic, that you're not as compatible as they thought, that continuing would be a mistake for both of you. They start magnifying minor incompatibilities into major red flags, reinterpreting your positive qualities as potential sources of future conflict, and focusing on any relationship challenge as proof that connection is impossible and dangerous. Their nervous system begins treating your emotional expressions as attacks requiring defensive responses rather than bids for connection requiring empathy and engagement. When you share vulnerabilities, they feel overwhelmed rather than trusted. When you express needs, they feel pressured rather than valued. When you show love, they feel suffocated rather than cherished. Their panic has completely reframed the emotional language of intimacy. The panic creates internal pressure to escape the relationship before they become more attached and therefore more vulnerable to the catastrophic loss. Their trauma brain insists is inevitable. They feel like they're sitting in a burning building and need to jump out the window before the flames reach them, not understanding that the fire exists only in their traumatized nervous system's perception of emotional intimacy as existential threat. Their fight or flight activation often includes an overwhelming urge to create conflict that justifies leaving, to find flaws that make departure seem rational, or to behave in ways that push you away so they don't have to take responsibility for actively ending something good. Their panic makes destruction feel like self-preservation rather than self-sabotage. The most devastating aspect of their panic response is how it makes them incapable of accessing the parts of themselves that actually do want connection, do value your relationship, and do recognize that what you're offering is healing rather than harmful. Their nervous system hijacking completely overrides their conscious mind's ability to make rational decisions about their emotional well-being and relationship future. Their panic transforms you from a source of joy and connection into a trigger for their deepest psychological wounds, making it impossible for them to remain present with you without feeling like they're volunteering for emotional suicide. This neurological hijacking makes ghosting feel not like cruelty, but like the only escape from what their nervous system has convinced them is a psychological death trap disguised as love. The ghost protocol. Why disappearing feels safer than explaining. Once the avoidance panic response fully activates, Their traumatized nervous system calculates that completely disappearing feels infinitely safer than attempting to communicate their overwhelming emotional state or work through their attachment fears with your support. Confrontation, explanation, and vulnerable communication feel more terrifying than the cruelty of abandonment because those conversations would require them to stay present with exactly the intimacy and emotional exposure that triggered their panic in the first place. The ghost protocol activates because their nervous system views any attempt to address their feelings as additional emotional labor that would increase rather than decrease their overwhelm. Explaining why they're scared would require vulnerability about their trauma, their attachment patterns, and their emotional limitations. Exactly the kind of intimate sharing that feels dangerous to someone in full panic mode about emotional exposure. Disappearing feels like the only option that doesn't require more vulnerability they're not equipped to handle. Their twisted trauma logic convinces them that ghosting is actually the kinder option because it protects you from getting more attached to someone they believe will inevitably disappoint and hurt you. In their panic-distorted thinking, they're saving you from the pain of discovering their emotional inadequacy, their inability to sustain intimacy, and their capacity for causing relationship damage. They reframe abandonment as protection, cruelty as kindness. The disappearing act feels psychologically necessary because confronting their fears directly would require acknowledging that their panic response is about their trauma rather than relationship incompatibility. Admitting that they're running from love itself rather than running from you specifically would force them to confront the depth of their psychological wounds and the work required to heal them. A level of self-awareness that feels unbearable when they're already emotionally overwhelmed. Their ghost protocol includes elaborate internal justifications that make disappearing seem rational and necessary rather than cruel and avoidant. They convince themselves that you're better off without them, that the relationship wasn't really working anyway, that you'll understand their silence as communication about incompatibility, that disappearing now prevents greater pain later. These justifications allow them to abandon you while maintaining their self-image as someone who's making difficult but necessary choices. The communication required to address their panic honestly feels more threatening than the guilt and regret of ghosting, because honest communication would require them to stay emotionally present while discussing the very feelings that triggered their flight response. They can't explain their need to run without remaining present enough to have that conversation, which defeats the purpose of running in the first place. Their disappearing act often includes blocking you on social media, changing phone numbers, or taking other extreme measures to ensure they can't be contacted, because they know their resolve to maintain distance might weaken if you reach out with understanding, compassion, or willingness to work through their fears together. They have to make reconnection impossible to protect their decision to flee from their own internal pressure to return. The ghost protocol serves their need for immediate relief from emotional overwhelm without having to do any of the work required to address the underlying issues causing their panic. Disappearing provides instant distance from triggering intimacy while avoiding the vulnerability required to communicate their fears, the emotional labor of working through attachment issues, or the risk of discovering that love might actually be safe with the right person. Their silence becomes a form of emotional violence that transfers their internal pain onto you while protecting them from having to witness the devastation their abandonment creates. They choose to inflict confusion, self-doubt, and abandonment trauma on you rather than face their own trauma responses directly. Your pain becomes the price they're willing to pay for their psychological comfort. The ghosting often includes them monitoring your social media or checking in through mutual friends to ensure you're okay while maintaining their distance, revealing that their concern for your well-being exists alongside their unwillingness to take responsibility for the harm their disappearance has caused. They want to know you survived their abandonment without having to face accountability for creating the wound. Their ghost protocol frequently involves them compartmentalizing the relationship as if it never happened, avoiding places you might be, changing routines to prevent accidental encounters, and refusing to discuss the connection with mutual friends. This psychological erasure helps them avoid confronting the reality of what they destroyed and the pain they caused through their inability to handle normal relationship development. The most tragic aspect of their disappearing act is that it eliminates any possibility for healing, growth, or learning from the experience. By choosing silence over communication, they ensure they'll repeat these patterns in future relationships because they never develop the skills required to navigate attachment fears constructively. Their ghost protocol protects them from immediate discomfort while guaranteeing long-term loneliness and continued relationship dysfunction. Their disappearance often leaves them with more regret and self-hatred than working through their fears would have required. But by the time they realize this, they've already burned the bridge and created wounds that make reconnection feel impossible, even if they develop the courage to try.